Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Join us as we explore Tolkien and all the ages of Middle-earth with your hosts from theOneRing.com, Jonathan Watson and Michael Grumbine.
It's a new week. It's a new life. It's a new person. Look at that. Right there.
Well,
it's Mixer.
I don't grow tired of your intro. I really don't. It is
oh, thanks.
Absolute quality.
Yeah, it's great. And also, I felt like when I listened to the intro this time, I was like, finally, we're back into the ages before
we're back into the ages of the Rings of Power when they were constructed.
Yeah, I wasn't going to start my Rings of Power.
What are you talking about? Oh, you were thinking I meant the Amazon show. Oh, Michael. That's so inappropriate.
We never referenced that show.
No. Guys, we're going to be reading Aldarion and Erendis, the Mariner's Wife, which is sadly an unfinished tale that comes from Tolkien's book Unfinished Tales, which was published, I think, in 1977. Is that right? Yeah, there it is, right there.
Oh, we have the same version.
Oh, right.
Mm-hmm.
Look,
that's a good one. I love this.
No,
dude, this Nazgul thing on the back.
Oh, that is sweet.
Goes so hard.
Fantastic.
But this is original Tolkien Gondor helm, Númenorian helm, right there.
Yes, that is Tolkien's sketch of a Númenorian helm.
Yeah,
this is a hot take.
This is everybody listening to this is now like, what in the world are you guys talking about? Anyway, I found this last year at a used bookstore. It's the original edition of Unfinished Tales. So I was very.
We're talking about Tolkien and helmets. I actually think that I always thought that the crown of Gondor was bad. I never liked it. I never liked his artistic rendition of it.
I think we're going to have an episode called Mixer's Hot Takes, and we're just going to go through them one by one and talk about how wrong you are.
It's just clunky. It's real, and then the little wings coming out like it's Hermie's shoe,
Yeah, the wings were not sweeping and large enough. It would have been more majestic. I agree with you about the wings. Yeah.
So
all right.
Good.
Well,
no, you
digress.
Something you disagree with.
Yeah, and this is it's a tough to understand helm. If you see a picture of it, maybe I'll put a link in the description. But it's sort of like, is this the front, or is this the ear? Like it's kind of crazy. So it's maybe that's why it's unfinished, because he never finished the helm either. He never got to actually redrawing it. That's why it's on the cover of Unfinished Tales. Unfinished Tales. So we're going to jump into that. We're actually only reading the first 4 pages in this copy here that you see in the original 1977 version. It's only the first 4 pages before Erendis even comes into the story. So this is, as Michael said earlier, this is to us is just called Aldarion and the Mariner. We're not including the wife or the Erendis.
Right.
But before we jump into all that, first of all, thanks everybody for listening. If you like what you're hearing, please go to Spotify and give us a review, or Apple and give us a review. And the more people that review, the more people find us, the more people listen, the more feedback we get, and the better this show is. So it's all about becoming better for all of you all.
Little known fact, our Rings of Power jokes will become better the more 5-star reviews we get.
Less data.
Well, our tweeting is going to be tremendous because the Middle-earth Mixer is here today.
Yeah.
It's such a weight to carry, but somebody has to put out banners.
Excellent.
Oh man, I don't know how you do it. I don't know. You have the precise. I don't know if zeitgeist is the right words, but the soul of Twitter. Somehow you took part of it, and it's embedded in your own heart. And
I contribute that to my work in PR.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
I feel like I have like a good finger on the pulse of what slaps.
Yeah. I learned so much about what memes are new and what phrases are acceptable now by following you on Twitter. So yeah, just look up the Middle-earth Mixer. I'll put a link below too. Follow him on Twitter for sure. He is growing fast, and he's going to be leaving us all in his dust one day. But yeah, if you like what you're hearing, let me jump back to that. You can also become a member of us here by going to theonereal.com/members. You get our extended podcast where we'll address some questions and talk a little bit more about where we're going with Aldarion and Erendis. We're going to talk a little bit about the Harfoots and Aldarion and Erendis, believe it or not. Speaking of the Rings of Power, I forgot we have a new member too. I'm going to have to edit this after the fact if I can throw it in. So Harrison, Adam, Lynn, and is it Rick? I can't remember who became our 4th sponsor. We've got a bunch of members, but only the sponsors, they give 5 times as much in order to get their names here, and we honor them and thank them for supporting us as we keep trudging forward into this. And thankfully, we're not doing any more changes right now for the films, because though we love the films in some ways and hate them in others, I mean, there's more an appreciation for it than that. It's nice to get back into Tolkien's actual words. So, all right. Aldarion and Erendis, I said earlier, it's Unfinished Tales, right? Published in 1977. And if you haven't read Unfinished Tales, you might come into it and going like, ooh, I can learn some more about Tolkien, but prepare to be disappointed at the end of every single one, because indeed they are unfinished. It's like, wait, you got to keep going with this. And he never did. And so Aldarion and Erendis really ends, it's what, 30 pages, 40 pages? I can't remember.
It's 40.
40. So an Unfinished Tale, it seems like it's the most dramatic story in Unfinished Tales, the most prosaic, right? It's less of notes, more of like so a lot of the other Unfinished Tales, it doesn't feel like it was written to be an actual story he wrote, whereas Tolkien actually was, he wrote this as something he wanted to finish, it seems. And to that end, I do have the one quote we have in letters where he talks about Aldarion and Erendis. And this was to the Thane of the Tolkien Society of America, Dick Plotz, in September 1965. And he wrote this: "There is also a large amount of matter that is not strictly part of the Silmarillion. Cosmogony and matter concerning the Valar, and later matter concerning Númenor and the war in Middle-earth, the fall of Eregion and death of Celebrimbor, and the history of Celeborn and Galadriel. As for Númenor, the tale of the Akallabeth, or downfall, is fully written. The rest of its internal history is only in annal form and will probably remain so, except for one long Númenorian tale, The Mariner's Wife, now nearly complete," which doesn't seem that way after reading this, "concerning the story of Aldarion, the sixth king, and his tragic relations with his father and his wife. This is supposed to have been preserved in the downfall, when most of the Númenorian lore was lost that dealt with the first age, because it tells how Númenor became involved in the politics of Middle-earth." So that's the only quote, the only thing we have about Aldarion and Erendis outside of Unfinished Tales. But yeah. And so I know we kind of all have a little bit of different opinions on this here. Going into it, and I know this is sort of more of an intro episode. We're going to talk about Aldarion and his father primarily. But I actually really like this, mainly because I feel like there's a lot to it, and it's going somewhere, and then we never quite get there. So it's kind of like you're going up the roller coaster, and you can see the tracks laid out in front of you, and then when you get to the top, they just stop and they have you walk off and walk back down the steps. You never get to actually ride the ride that's in front of you. That's what it feels like reading this here. It's like we get to the good part where something has changed, where maybe there's going to be some serious action happening, and then it just ends. I don't know. So that was my initial take on it. What do you guys think of this story before we get into the details of it?
Since I'm probably a midpoint between literally I'm a midpoint also in the show.
In the video. Yeah, sure.
In the video. But also I'll say that I also enjoy this story, and my take by the end of it, not for this episode, because we're only reading a few pages for this episode. By the end, I am going to explain why Jonathan why this is less unfinished than he thinks it is, because my take is that actually most of the heart of what Tolkien wanted to say in the story is told in the telling that exists. Although clearly it is unfinished, but I think. So that's my take, kind of a teaser. And now to our guest, who is only here by force. We twisted the thumb screws.
No, it's my pleasure to be here. I wouldn't say that I disagree with either of you. I think whenever I say that I'm not a huge fan of something with Tolkien, you have to take it with the grain of salt of I'm a fan of it all. So this is like the thing that is on the lower rung of what I prefer to read. I think it's important, but it's one of those things that for me, it's like I only read it once and I understand it, and I don't have that much of a desire to go back and read it. But I get why it's important. Like this, if you guys both didn't want to do this podcast with me, I probably wouldn't have read that again for I don't know.
Yeah,
Ever.
Maybe indefinitely. I'm not sure, but I do think it's good. I do think it's important. I think that, and I'll save my thoughts for when we really get into it. But it does highlight the beginning of things to come later, which is obviously very important to the downfall of it all. So you need to know where the roots of the downfall come from, and it's important to read this so you know.
Yeah. All right. Well, then let's jump into it, and let's kind of give the lay of the land here of where the story begins, and that is with his father, Meneldur. He is the son of the fifth king. Aldarion is. So Meneldur is the fifth king of Númenor. Is it the year 780? I don't have it up here right now.
Which that the story starts? No.
Yeah, second age, isn't it?
It is second age. 725 is when he goes on his first.
Yeah, I think
voyage.
it's at 725.
So
700 he was born. Okay.
Yep.
So he was 25 when he went on his first 780. He would have been 80. That's when he met Erendis, maybe. Anyway, all right. So we learn about Meneldur. Meneldur loves Númenor. He is. It's the land that he loves. He goes up north to is it the Forest Star, and he sets up a tower so that he can watch the stars and he can look at the land and he can enjoy everything. And so the name means servant of the heavens. And we can immediately see, like, even just by his name, servant of the heavens. And then we have Aldarion, who is his name then means Aldarion means son of trees, but like he loved the ocean, right? And so his father, right away, we know, like, okay, there's going to be a difference in here. And so Tolkien initially, right away, he's setting up this rift that's going to happen between Meneldur and Aldarion, and that's really the whole. I think these first 4 pages is kind of setting up, like, man, one, they love what they love. And so, for instance, the Tolkien writes this about Meneldur: he was enamored of the stars in the heavens, all that he could gather of the lore of the Eldar and Edain concerning Ea and the deeps that lay about the kingdom of Arda. He studied, and his chief delight was in the watching of the stars.
And if I could jump in here, I would actually put a tweak on what you said, because it wasn't the land that he loved. I mean, he lived on the land. It was the heavens. It was the stars. Like the only time he left his abode high in the mountains in the highest point, aside from the central. Oh, what happened?
He did say he loved dearly the land of Númenor and all things in it. That is a quote directly from them.
Okay.
But he loved the stars even more, right? He was enamored of the stars in the heavens. He's the guy who just looks up and just can't stop looking. But yes.
But he was someone who was, sorry, go ahead.
He lives in this tower in the northern parts, the only parts that have these high mountains in all of the island. And I just want to tell our listeners and viewers, if you haven't, read the chapter before this one, which tells you all about. I mean, this also shows you Tolkien's love of geography, because he tells you all about the island of Númenor, which is a star-shaped island, roughly star-shaped, it's about 500 miles across at the farthest point between the two arms of two stars, and about 250 miles across at the middle. And so you got the star-shaped island. So it's a pretty sizable island. But the only place there's these tall mountains is in Forrestar, and that's where Meneldur lives his whole life until he's forced by becoming king to travel to the capital in the middle of the island, so which is Armenelos. So there really is. I saw a difference between him and his sons, but a similarity. So his son is enamored of the ocean, as we will quickly learn. Oh, cool. There we go. Nice. Almost like our website is renowned for its maps.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm just showing a map of Númenor on the screen that by Christopher Tolkien, and you can see Forrestar up here at the top.
Right. So, but I see a similarity between him and his son. So both of them are enamored of things outside of the island. For him, it's the stars. And what is interesting too is that for those in deep in history, those who are associated with the stars in the heavens, I mean, this was true of the ancient cultures. I mean, we have this of the Magi, for example, in the Christian story, but also all through the Egyptian lore and Assyrian and everyone, Babylonian and Chinese, is those who are look to the stars are the ones that are wise. So you have wisdom and associated with that. And for Meneldur, mostly, except for a few decisions that he makes, he is regarded as fairly wise, whereas his son is entirely different. But they both are obsessed with a certain part of Middle Earth, and so I find that fascinating.
I think an important thing to note, since we're providing context, is Meneldur is actually the younger of two sisters. So it's one is Silmarillion, obviously, and then I can't recall the middle sister.
Isilme.
It's what?
Isilme, Isilme with an umlaut over it.
Okay, right.
Who apparently had no children, so she's.
And this is where you have the first case of, I believe, of the oldest child not receiving the scepter. And I'm of the opinion that, I think Tolkien makes it pretty clear, especially since all of the heroes that come later, Elendil, Isildur, Aragorn, they are of Silmarillion's line. And later in Númenor, it becomes legal for queens to take up the scepter. But at this point, it's not legal yet. So this is kind of, in my opinion, where the break between what was meant to be and what actually happened takes place. So what was meant to be was for Silmarillion to receive the scepter, even though it doesn't happen because it's not legal yet. And therefore, this sort of corruption gets sewn into the whole thing. And it starts off slow because you don't really see it with Meneldur, right? He's, for the most part, looked at as sort of a wise king. Even though he's not perfect, he makes mistakes in raising Aldarion. But I think that it's important to establish that context, that this is where the roots of some level of discord kind of comes into the whole story.
Good point. Because Tar Elendil, Meneldur's father, is the fourth king of Númenor. So we're real early on in the line.
Yeah.
And the rift already happens. And like you say, from the oldest sister's line, Silmarillion, comes all of the greatest kings and the fate of the faithful who survive the destruction of their island. So maybe in one sense it's kind of two-pronged, right? So Tar Elendil, the fourth king, breaks what should have been. Well, he didn't break it; it was their rule. But he follows the rule to the detriment of the good, and he passes the line on to his third child, Meneldur, who is his first son. Mm-hmm. And then from Meneldur, we see also the roots of the destruction of Númenor in the sort of worship and lust for the sea that his son, who is the protagonist of this story, Aldarion, embodies. We were joking beforehand. I said, like, one point in this early first reading, he literally invents the first houseboat and lives on it.
He hates the land so much he doesn't even want to live on it. He's just like, no, put me on a boat.
Live on the ship.
I like
so.
This is why I find him cringe. The things that he does, it just irks me.
He's houseboat guy.
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons to find him cringe. I think as we read through it, the things, like, I feel like we learn so little about him because we know so little about what we'll learn is his relationship with the elves and how he's appreciated by the elves. We just hear that third party in a letter, really. And for the elves essentially eventually thanking him, but that we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a later episode.
Right. So in the beginning, this is kind of like, it reminds me a little bit of like the genealogy in the book of Matthew, because it's basically like the first couple pages, not quite as dry as Matthew, where it's telling the line of Christ, but this is telling the lineage, and it almost feels like a combo between Matthew and Dostoevsky, because he got all these people with different names too, and so. Even the protagonist of this story, Aldarion, his real name is Anardil, lover of the sun, which wasn't really true. He didn't really love the sun that much. So.
It's aspirational. It's an aspirational name that his parents gave him. Like, please, just love the sun, boy. Come
on. With sun being up in the heavens, his father would have chosen a name like that, I suppose.
Yes, right.
But so Aldarion, we're told very early on that Aldarion has a great love for the ocean, and he in 725. Interestingly, I find it interesting that Tolkien is always always tells us when the coming of age is for different races, or not always, but often. So we know what hobbits coming of age is at 33, and so for the Númenóreans it's 25, and so he comes of age and immediately wants to leave. Like, I'm gone. I want to go to Middle Earth. So his father gives him permission, although sadly, because I think he kind of has a foreboding of what's going on, and so Aldarion goes off for a few years, and
let's go. It's with Veantur, right? It's his father's, his
mother's
uncle, right?
His
mother's dad. It's the in-laws.
Oh, it's his
grandfather.
Right? Yeah, it's his grandfather. His maternal grandfather, right?
Right. So it's the in-laws. It's Meneldur's in-laws that are causing the problems here. It's one thing we also learned in this.
Captain of the ships.
Sorry, but yeah. So so Veantur, so his mother, Aldarion comes across like his mother really loves him. He's a little bit of a mama's boy, perhaps loved because he's the only son and he's going to be the king. But he studies under Veantur, right? Tolkien wrote, Aldarion was much loved by Veantur, his mother's father, and he dwelt often in his house on the southern side of the Firth of Romena. And that's where like this whole thing was birthed. And so then at 25, when he was born, like you were saying, Michael, sorry I interrupted. I just want to make sure that we give people the context. Veantur is like, come with me, and Meneldur, come with me on this long trip across the sea. And I think Veantur was the first person to sail back to Middle Earth. He was the first Númenorian to actually get to the lands of Middle Earth again. So it had been 700 years since any Númenorians had been back to Middle Earth, and so he was the first one to go there. And he decides to take Aldarion with him, and his dad says, "Sure." Sorry, Michael, and you were going to say, unless.
Oh no, you're fine. I was actually going to shift to the only thing that our modern listeners would have in their mind's eye for who haven't read the books is in the Rings of Power when they're showing the city, the supposed capital city, which so just for the record, it appears to be some kind of mashup of Romena and Armenelos, because they're trying to represent it as the capital city, but it's a port city, and the capital city of Númenor is not a port city. And I'm going to point out, it's funny because when I was first reading about Númenor, I always thought it was so strange that they hadn't left their island basically for almost 700 years. They left their island, but they hadn't reached Middle Earth for almost 700 years. But then you look at the picture that Jonathan's got up there and this is super helpful for those of you that are just listening to the podcast. But if you go to theonering.com, you will easily find the Númenorian map. And you'll notice that Meneltarma, the tallest mountain on the island, is right in the center of the star. Armenelos is very close nearby. Their culture was actually not centered around the sea. Their culture was centered around the land itself, which was a kind of refuge in the destruction that had been
the land of gift, right?
Yes,
that's what they call it.
Exactly what it means. And so they're not first and foremost a people of the sea. Now, of course, as they thrive and prosper, they spread to the edges of the island, and they do become renowned as a maritime power, which we're hearing some of the beginning of this story now. But they weren't, the whole like sea is always right crap that was chanted in Rings of Power it's not. I mean, maybe it's a 13-year-old's take on what they would have felt like at a much later stage, but it's not. This doesn't reflect the focus of the Númenorians, especially in the first half of their existence. And I also thought it was cool that that Tolkien references, which he doesn't do in The Lord of the Rings. He references that, for example, upon the return of Aldarion back to Númenor for the first time on this great ship. I got to get the accents on the right syllables.
Yeah, right. I know. I tried this so many times too.
Numerama, right? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
That he came on right close to Eru Hantale, which is a religious feast. So Tolkien doesn't reference religious feasts in The Lord of the Rings, But here he does, because of course the Númenóreans are the only race of men to worship Eru directly on their mountain, and this is a feast in Eru's honor. So anyway, that I thought it was that part of it was striking and interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll shut up.
I think,
but all of the Tolkien experts, they all tell me that there's no religious references in Tolkien's works. Am I just hearing this for the first time? Whoa.
Yes,
You're
well,
blowing my mind right now.
The culture of experts, it turns out, is not all it's cracked up to be. So yeah, I really.
Scholar has become a red flag, at least.
It is. Yeah, a red flag, and often with red or pink or purple hair.
Yes.
To couple that with.
That's right. So what's funny is that he'd spent years in Middle Earth. His entire focus, he goes back to Middle Earth a bunch of times before the end of the part of the reading we were reading. And his entire focus is, not entire focus. He loved exploring. But the primary thing he takes away is he spends all this time in Middle Earth learning from Círdan. So Círdan makes a bunch of appearances, not directly, but in this part.
He's mentioned so many times.
He's mentioned a lot.
I think it's important to note, though, that although he loved exploring, he didn't really love the lands that he was visiting. You remember when he asked him, he's like, "Oh, what was the Meneldur?"
Yeah,
I think he's like, "What was the best part of your trip?" And he's like, "I don't know, trees, grass, rocks. There's that stuff over there."
Yeah, right. Yeah,
I think something of that nature.
That's the most important line of the entire section we're reading. So, so Meneldur asks him, "What did you see, Onya?" Which I guess Onya is a term of endearment, I believe. "In your far journeys that now lives most in memory." But Aldarion looked east towards the night, was silent. At last he answered, but softly, as one that speaks to himself, "The fair people of the elves, the green shores, the mountains wreathed in clouds, the regions of mist and shadow beyond guess. I do not know." But it says, he ceased, and Meneldur knew that he had not spoken his full mind. Part of me is like, because all he can think about is the sea, right? He's like, yeah, the elves were cool, but man, the ocean. And like, what did you see when you were abroad? Well, I saw the ocean, and all that really mattered. But he couldn't say that to his dad because he knew his dad hates the ocean. He knew his dad wants him to talk about the wonderful things he sees, the stars in the sky, the elves and their love of the stars, right? That might have been something he was thinking about. Even though he says it lives most in memory, those memories are still good of what the elves stood for them, which we'll learn about later when the elves come back to Númenor for the first time too. Come back and come to Númenor. Yeah,
they're gerbs. Yep, exactly.
So that's two. One more and you're out. One more and you're out. Mixer. That's two jokes.
I got one in the chamber.
I'm ready to.
It'll come along. That part's fascinating to me because we recall from The Lord of the Rings that the sort of addictive longing for the sea, I'm going to call it addictive. Tolkien never uses that word, but to my knowledge, but the addictive longing to the sea was a trait in elves of many times. I mean, there's a whole subset of elves that all they do is live on the coast. They wouldn't even come into literal paradise, into the center of literal paradise, because they had to live on the edges of the ocean, off of Valinor for Tol Eressëa, etc. And so this longing for the sea, it's funny because I asked myself the question: Is Tolkien trying to say that's a bad thing? Because it seems natural to them, right? But with Aldarion, it definitely is a bad thing. So it's shown to be an excess. It's shown to be disproportionate. It's wrong. It actually wrecks his life and the lives of people around him. And so, and sows the seeds of Númenor's eventual fall. So Tolkien seems to be giving us a kind of cautionary tale, but how is the longing for the sea any different than the longing for the stars? Like, is there?
Remember what we learned. I in the Silmarillion, the sea has still echoes of the music of the Ainur, right? Tolkien writes essentially something like that in the Silmarillion, and they don't worship, but they hold dear Uinen, right? Osei's spouse, essentially the protector of Númenor.
Yeah, Maiar's spouse,
and the Maiar's spouse, yes, and so. There's something about that, right? Every time the longing for the sea of the elves, right? The elves have this longing for the sea that's somehow born into them. Even we hear that in Legolas, right? He heard the gulls, and like that birthed a longing in him that he hadn't experienced as as it piqued it in him. So I think that's where the for Tolkien, that's where the longing of the sea, that's kind of where it's birthed out of, is that the sound of the water, the sound of the ocean. When you're there, it has something of the music of the Ainur still in it.
I think a great word you use there, Michael, is excess. When does whatever passion that you have become excess? Because we know that even, Tolkien laid out too much of a love of the stars being a problem as well. That one quote that Gandalf has where he's talking about the descendants of Gondor kind of into like lesser days.
Oh, good
where
call.
he says, aged men in towers, they sit up in towers and ask questions of the stars. Meanwhile, everything falls into ruin. So I think you used a great word there, is excess. It's knowing when to say enough of something. That's actually, I'm listening to another podcast right now that's breaking down sort of a bunch of different things about the Bible and what does it mean about, being made in the image of God. And one of the points that this gentleman makes is knowing when to say enough. So because that's been on my mind lately, that immediately, when you said excess, that hit I feel like that hits the nail on the head right there. So whether your passion be for the stars or whether your passion be for the trees in a lot of the woodland elves or Mirkwood elves cases, whether your passion is for the land, the stars, the ocean, whenever it becomes too much of something, that's when you're living outside of what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and I think it's when it affects the people around you. But you can also see it with Aldarion, and this comes to the last section that we're talking about today. He doesn't love the trees because they're beautiful growing things. He loves them because he can cut them down and make boats out of them, right? And so it becomes it's a tool, right? It feeds his excess, whatever's around him. If it can feed that one thing that he cannot get his mind off of, that makes it more than it should be.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mixer. Great point. And also, Jonathan, it calls to mind some interesting images. Like even the Valar have a problem with this sometimes. You have the story about Aule and Yavanna and their conversation, and they're both kind of excess. Like Aule ends the conversation with maybe the only time in history that a married man wins in an argument with his wife, which is that he says, and yet the dwarves will have need of fuel for their. In other words, they're still going to cut down your trees, and so he, it's this swing between Yavanna, who is just so much on the side of the living and the plants and the forest, and that she's, she brings about the eagles and the ents through her plea, and yet it's an extreme. And so is Aule, and through Aule, his creations, sub-creations, the dwarves, they are also they represent an extreme. They love beauty, they love things that are really beautiful, but they very easily go to excess in their desire for that. The slaying of Thingol for the Noglamir, and their famous destruction of forests for their mines and their love of gold. So you have these excesses, which are really interesting, and Tolkien does seem to be pointing to them. But in each excess, there's a good, and it also reminds me of of the ancient Greeks, like the idea of virtue, of excellence, is a mean between two extremes. You can have too little of a passion for something and too much. So you need self-control, and even love of the good of particular goods, I should say, needs to be controlled. And moderated, and it's when people don't moderate, like Aldarion, that you end up with real problems.
I think it's hilarious that you brought up the quote about "Nevertheless, they will have need of wood," because one of the members in our Discord chat posted this week when we were talking a little bit about this story, but he put this little meme together.
Oh no, I did not see that. I was not quoting Discord.
So it's a picture of what's his name, Farazan from the Rings of Power, and with the quote, "Nevertheless, they will have need of wood." Aldarion, which is true, right? The ships will have need of wood. So
yeah, that's great.
Definitely. Excellent. Same wavelength there.
I'm just laughing that every time I see it, like those costumes were so bad. Oh my gosh, the background.
I knew showing the picture would just be a problem because we'll descend into the madness of the Rings of Power. Maybe we should have a whole episode about the new.
We could. Well, the new rumors that just dropped.
Don't even go there. I know.
I heard it, but I mean, like, what didn't they come from our channel?
Yeah, the other. Yes, it came from the other one.
The other one. Yeah.
The one that has me blocked on Twitter.
Oh, hey, me too. Wait, maybe not me. I can't remember. I think one of their. Anyway, yes, it's. It's
funny because when I go to the, I don't know if I've told you this before, but you know how there's a Lord of the Rings Explore page. Mm-hmm. When I go there now, there's like about 4 things show up. Just so many people have me blocked.
Oh man, I'm so sorry. I won't block you, Mixer.
Appreciate it. I'm a good guy, you know. I just like to have. Sometimes I can be a little pithy on Twitter, but I like this.
It's all good. Your depth is much appreciated here. So, anyway, so the last thing we learn about them is that this is the time. Right, he went. How many more trips did he go? Did he say to? Did Tolkien write before? Was it like 4 at this point at the end of this here? I didn't go through and count. I meant to.
Well, I thought it was funny. It was like there's one point where it's like, and then he went on another trip. And yet again, he went on another
trip.
Yeah. The important part is that he just keeps going. He just keeps leaving. I thought it was like first sign of a dysfunctional, his father acting in the most dysfunctional fashion. It's like Tar Meneldur ever opposed his son, and he set a curb on the felling of trees in Númenor for the building of vessels. And it came therefore into Aldarion's mind that he would find timber in Middle-earth and seek there for a haven for the repair of his ships. And then it proceeds to describe all the coastline he saw and all the wonderful forests that were good for building ships. But I mean, like, it's classic. Like, my son is doing something bad with this X thing, therefore I will forbid X thing from happening, and that'll solve it.
It's like it doesn't really address the real
not
problem,
the way
I think.
parenting works.
Just block them on Twitter, and you won't have to worry about what they say ever again.
I think that there's
sort of idea.
We can consider Meneldur for the most part like a good king in the descendants of kings that goes, but I don't think that. I don't think he's without fault, and I don't think that he's without, kind of that point I made earlier about this is where sort of the corruption begins. I don't think that he's without fault. I think that he was ineffective in the way that he handled his son, and I think he was derelict at certain times. There was certain parts where it says that he was estranged from his father, and you could play a game about whose fault that was. But I definitely think that, there's faults to be had that kind of builds into that point I made about here's where the corruption begins.
Right. I agree. And I think that it's real important to keep in mind that although it's, speaking of children, one of the harder lessons from a moral perspective in my experience is trying to reiterate or inculcate the idea with my children that a sin of omission can be just as bad as a sin of commission. Like, not doing what you're supposed to can be just as flawed as doing a bad thing. So if you are a parent, you have a responsibility to raise your children well. And if you don't do that, and you just you're like, well, but he never beat me. Oh, okay. Well, that's great. It's a super ridiculously low bar for you to claim that someone's a decent person. So in this case, I mean, obviously, Aldarion is a man, so he has responsibility for his own choices, and so you can't say that it was the estrangement was just his father's fault, but clearly, I think Tolkien is hinting that there's fault on both sides, and Meneldur is ineffective. Even the things that we're told that he does, like I think that might even be the first thing that we're told that he does in this chapter is like forbid his son from cutting down trees. Oh, okay.
But it's almost like it's not even it's not addressed to his son. He's circumnavigating a confrontation with his son by basically making some.
Exactly. If you're king,
or whatever to not.
Exactly. If you're king, why don't you bring your son in and confront it directly and say, this is disordered and we need to stop, and I'm the king, so this is the way it works. I'm a king with a very specific lifespan. There was a joke I was going to make because I started doing the math. I'm like, holy crud! Every single king of Númenor after Elros lives between 398 and 412 years. So this ridiculously tiny band of time. They're all almost exactly 400 years, and then they die. And so up through the 8th line anyway. So you have a very specific amount of time to be on the island, and you are king for that. Well, they give up the scepter before their death, so 50 years before their death or something. But I think this is all seeding. We've mentioned this, but there's so many seeds of the downfall of the men of Númenor. And what's classic is they haven't even reached their heights, right? So their heights for which they're known, they haven't reached them. We already see the seeds of their downfall.
Right.
Hey, what do you guys think?
Go ahead.
What do you think of their love of Uinen? That was interesting to me. They're even called the
Uinendili, yeah.
Uinendili. Thank you. What's up with the love of the Lady of the Seas there? And why not Ose? Why not Olmo?
I've often wondered that, and I
think it's because. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, if I had to come up with a reason, I think it's, when people typically, when they refer to a vessel, it's in the feminine, like a sea vessel. And I think that there's something about the feminine and care for being out on the sea. It's a very dangerous activity in and of itself. So I think that there's something comforting about the appeal to Uinen as opposed to Ase, which might drum up feelings of more aggressiveness or like Ase kind of gives the impression of the power of the sea as opposed to the care of the sea.
Yeah, she's the one that brings, they revere her for they look to her for calm seas, right? That she would be there to protect them and to protect them from the storms and the things that were out there. And so that's why I think it is. And maybe because Númenor, was born from a cataclysm in a way, and that it's in the middle, not according to the Rings of Power, but it's in the middle of a wide, vast ocean that takes you a long, long time to go from one landmass to the other. So they are,
or a day and a half if you're,
or a day and a half, right? If you're Jeff Bezos, yeah. So I think that's why she's the feminine side of the masculine, dangerous ocean, maybe. And it's always way cooler to worship the feminine god. And she's way more hot. And sculptures are so much better. You remember
had that statue of her in the Rings of Power.
They did, yeah.
In the prisons for some reason.
At least they got that right. In the prison. Oh man, you bring up the obvious and you're like, wait, I missed that. You're right. It's the freaking in the middle of the prison, so all the prisoners can continue to worship her.
To give hope to the prisoners. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or just another example of the patriarchy keeping the woman in prison.
So this is from the Silmarillion of the Maiar. This is what Tolkien wrote about Uinen. He wrote, his spouse, I'll say spouse, is Uinen, the Lady of the Seas, whose hair lies spread through all waters under sky. All creatures she loves that live in the salt streams and all weeds that grow there. To her mariners cry, for she can lay calm upon the waves, restraining the wildness of Ose. The Númenorians lived long in her protection and held her in reverence equal to the Valar.
Nice.
It's an interesting touch, right? They are stuck, and so they have to be mariners of some sort. And they can see, right? Those with far sight, they can see the city. Michael, come on, you remember all the Tolkien. Yes, they can see that from. Is it the top of the Meneltarma only, or from the oceans? I think it's from the top.
I think it's the top of Meneltarma, yeah.
Yeah. So they can see that, and so they know that's there, and so there's a longing for them to be in the seas, but they know it's dangerous, and so perhaps that's why Uinen is their homie.
These are all good reasons. I am.
What was yours? Oh, you're satisfied. I was looking for the right reason.
The balance of chaos and order, man.
She also loved lobsters, I hear. So there's that.
It did say all living things in the ocean, so lobsters would be one of those. Yeah,
That's right.
All
right, so
that's awesome that you brought in a Peterson impersonation. That's fantastic.
Oh man.
This podcast
all right.
is everything.
So let's close this down. As we learned, we were just talking about they sowed the seeds of Aldarion was sowing the seeds of discontent. As Meneldur says, he believed that he sowed the seeds of restlessness and the desire of other lands to hold, and so he pushes them away. And what does he do? He establishes Vignalande at the New Haven. So the first seed, boom, right there. That's like some Meneldur just pushes him away, and he's like, "All right, I will start cutting down all the trees in Middle Earth instead." And so you could say that Aldarion was the sower, but Meneldur he was giving him the fertilizer to do it. So it ends up poor for them.
He also established the first guild of D&D adventurers.
There it is.
Therefore, he formed the Guild of Venturers that afterwards was renowned.
I was waiting for somebody to bring that up.
To that brotherhood were joined all the hardiest and most eager mariners, and young men sought admission to it, even from the inland regions of Númenor.
Well, see, they had to unionize because the elves will work for lower wages.
Oh my goodness, that's 3, man. That's 3.
Oh man,
2.5.
Excellent. All the economic jokes. I don't know why I find them so funny. That's
rage inducing.
That's all they know.
If you don't laugh, you cry.
It is stated in one of the notes here that the Guildhouse of Venturers was confiscated by the kings and removed to the western haven of Andunier, and all its records perished in the downfall, including all their records. So at some point, we don't know why, but at some point, another guild came over and is like, "We don't like you. We're going to knock all you out."
Yeah, well, it was the first guild of murder hobos. So after a certain amount of time, everyone gets tired of the murder hobos. So I'll say that as a D&D old D&D nerd.
Yeah. This is outside my vocabulary. So you keep going, Michael.
Oh, you don't know the reference? That's the name for adventurers in Dungeons and Dragons is the meme name that people from the 90s for the 2000s came up with was murder hobos, because there's just wandering groups of people that just scour the landscape for treasure and kill everything they find.
So it's kind of the Númenorians on the shores. Like they eventually became that. They became the murder hobos.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Any final thoughts before I turn off your mics? I'm joking.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of it. So we brought up the guilds. That was something I did want to touch on, mostly because I wanted to make the Rings of Power joke.
Yeah. The one other thing is that we learned that this was essentially written in Gondor, based on the one quote where they write where the Nandor elves still dwell, and I think it's right here in Vignalande, where the. So in any case, so this isn't written. Tolkien even wrote this as a history book in a sense from Gondor. If I have the note here, before the year the Third Age, 1981.
Right. I liked from the notes on that. I liked the long description of the meeting of the first men of Númenor that travel back in 600, I think it says. They travel to Middle Earth for the first time, and some of the men in the West come to see their long lost kin who they had all thought had died under the waves, and so Tolkien's got this. He builds up this great, epic meeting between the men of Númenor and the some of the remaining good men of the West, descendants of Beor, etc. And what happens? What's the first thing that happens? They don't understand each other's language. So Tolkien's like, and he describes how they figured out how to talk to each other. It's like, this is how a philologist writes an epic story. But they didn't know how to talk to each other. So then it was all awkward for like 2 nights while they tried to figure it out. All right.
Because he would know, if this amount of time passed, there's probably a lot of breakage.
Yeah. And I mean, it's realistic, right? But it's just the fact that it's like, and then they just were awkward for like a bunch of time while they figured out each other's language.
Yeah.
So it's funny.
All right, guys. All right. See, I told you we could do a lot on 4 pages.
Oh, we can do more.
And we did. Yeah.
Well, stop it.
It's time to shut it down.
No, right. We can get into more of those details later. All right. So I think for next week, I think what we'll do is read up through. I want to say before they get married. I don't remember exactly where that is, because that gives us time to sort of talk about their relationship and where they came from and all that sort of stuff. So that might be another 4 or 5 pages. But yeah, so I don't have that exact point, but just read the whole thing and follow along with us as we keep going, because you'll get a lot out of it. Even on
my one question, not to bring up Rings of Power again, but did did they have it mentions the green the bow of return.
They did. Yeah.
And I think in the Rings of Power they had like green on the front of the ships. So it's like again this like little thing that I think somebody put in there. It's like it's like Uinen in the prison, it's just like a random dash of like intense lore that you wouldn't think they would think of. And it's like, who behind the scenes is throwing this in there?
Well, this was my theory, Mixer, when we did all of our reviews of the different episodes. Was my theory was they got like this whole writer's room, and it's like 80%, 90% seated, but there's like one writer that's good, and he just keeps his head down, and every once in a while he finds something to put in there. It's like, yeah, whoa, that's awesome. That's actually from Tolkien. But he has no, and every once in a while there's a line of dialogue. It's like, that's actually good. That's good dialogue. Like one line out of 45 minutes. And so yeah, I would say that's my one good writer theory that I had. Like there's one guy in there somewhere that has some. So he's probably the guy that put the green on the ships.
I think the other term for that is lipstick on a pig. just saying. That's kind of what they're doing with it. All right, everybody.
He got that. That's cool to have a statue of Uinen. I think that's good. I'm glad they put that in there versus not.
Support it. If only
is it good? I wish we were even more wrong so that somebody can come through later. Anyway, this is a whole nother discussion. We can talk about those. I don't know if those leaks are real. Then like this next season of the Rings of Power 2 will be so much fun to watch, because our expectations
are going to be a wild ride.
It's going to be nuts. We're going to have an episode all about what one of them was like shadow facts and the Miras, where they come from, like in the Second Age. What? It's going to be a freaking old horse.
The worst I'm really excited about was the Celeborn one.
Yeah. Oh, that was so bad. What I'm excited for is the discourse, because I love to argue. I love when like Lord of the Rings topics are trending. So like I'm just excited for that to pick back up again. So we'll see.
You're going to
we'll see what the show brings to the table.
You're here for the churn.
It'll be all right, everybody. All right, we are going to jump into our extended edition, guys. If you want to hear that, go to theonering.com/members, become a member to get that. We're going to talk about the Harfoots in Middle Earth and the Númenorians doing what they might do to them when they find them. So, and we got a couple other questions from other members. Go to theonering.com/member to get that. And if you want to, I forgot to mention this early. We do have, you can join our Discord chat. We have a beloved freeloaders section now. So if you're a freeloader, you can join our community, and you can't see behind the curtain, though there's a lot more than what you saw. That was a really bad analogy, because
is it just
no there's only an old bald man behind the curtain every time you pay for members. No, that's not true. There's a lot more going on if you become a member for $4 a month. First month is free, and we'll see you on the other side, everybody.
All right, take care, freeloaders.
Yeah, and freeloaders, we love you. Get that link down below.